Hey everyone, this is David Brown with the migration update for April 15th, 2024 from the Braddock Bay Hawk Watch. As of today, we are officially halfway through the Hawk Watch season and we had a lot of people and a lot of birds today, so let's get right into it. Kim and I started out the day at the Braddock Bay East Spit. You can see it was a beautiful sunny morning, and you can also see that the sand bridge between the East Spit and the Barrier Island keeps getting narrower and narrower, so I think you need boots now to actually get onto the Barrier Island. And the highlight of our morning birding out there was a dunlin, maybe the same one that we had yesterday. We had a total of 46 species from the East Spit. We headed over to Braddock Bay Park a bit early to get a walk in and go out on the boardwalk. And here's a nice swamp sparrow that perched up in the marsh for us. We also had a few purple finches perched in the trees behind the parking area. And we even had a lone cedar waxwing, not a species that you often see as an individual. Usually they come in big flocks. Up on the platform, it continued to be a beautiful day. It stayed mostly sunny for much of the day. The winds were out of the west to begin with, and at times shifted more northwesterly. And those winds were a bit chilly in the morning, but by the afternoon it had warmed up nicely, and pretty much throughout the whole day we had a pretty steady flight of hawks, although with those winds and the blue skies it was a little bit tough to spot them because many of the migrating hawks were up pretty high. Here we have a large raptor with very pointed wings, so we should be thinking large falcon. This is a peregrine falcon. Here's a species that we're becoming increasingly familiar with in recent days. Here we have a small buteo. We see some brown barring underneath. We see that the wingtips are somewhat pointed, and we see a dark trailing edge to the wings and a dark tail with a wide white band. This is an adult broad-winged hawk. Here we have a large dark raptor with some splotchy white underneath, especially in the wing pit area. We see a large head. This is an immature bald eagle. Here's a two-toned raptor with a small reddish head. This is a turkey vulture. Here we have a small raptor with very pointed wings. We should be thinking falcon. And when we have a small falcon that is light-colored underneath, that would be an American kestrel. And from the patterning on the breast, we know that this is a female American kestrel. Here's another look at an adult broad-winged hawk. This one's in a glide posture, and when they're in a glide, a lot of times the trailing edge to the wings is perfectly straight, but sometimes, like on this one, they'll tuck those wingtips back a little bit, giving a little bit of an angular look. Here we have another buteo that's pretty plain underneath, overall just light colored, maybe a little bit of streaking to the breast and a medium to longish tail. But the thing that stands out the most is we can see translucent crescents near the wingtips and see that the wingtips are made up of 5 feathers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, giving it a more squared off or blunt shape. Those features combined, especially just looking at this wingtip area, is enough to tell us that this is a juvenile red-shouldered hawk. Here's a small hawk that gave us an excellent view. We see a long tail and long rounded wings, so we should be thinking accipiter. We see that the tail feathers are all the same length, giving the tip of the tail a more squared off appearance, and we see a relatively small head. If we look at the underside streaking on the body, it starts out kind of a vertical streaking. Again, that's if it was perched upright in front of us. But then as it goes down to the belly, it becomes more of a barring, which is a typical plumage of a juvenile sharp-shinned hawk. I always like when I get photos that are a comparison of 2 separate species. So here at the top left, we see a smaller hawk, and we see that it's got a long tail and long rounded wings. The tail is very squared off and the head is small, so this is another sharp-shinned hawk. If we look at the bottom right bird, we see it's a little bit larger and the shape is different. The sharp-shinned hawk was an accipiter. This bird on the right is a buteo. It's a small buteo. We see some brown barring to the underside of the body. We see a dark trailing edge to the wings. And the most noticeable thing about the tail is a wide white band. Now it does have some smaller white bands as well, but they're partially hidden by these covert feathers. This bird is an adult broad-winged hawk. We had some visitors to the Hawk Watch today who I'll be talking a little more about later, and they've been watching my videos for the past couple years, and they were asking about the local Cooper's hawk. Is it still chasing the turkey vultures? And they got to see it in person today. Here we have the local adult Cooper's hawk chasing a turkey vulture away from the nesting territory. Here's a nice comparison between the turkey vulture on the left and the smaller Cooper's hawk on the right. Again, notice that long tail with the rounded tip, long rounded wings that are held out straight, and a somewhat large head. Here we have a hawk, and maybe the most noticeable thing is that it has a red tail. So yes, this is an adult red-tailed hawk, but also take note of those dark patagial bars here in the shoulder area and the dark belly band. Here we have a large dark raptor with a lot of splotchy white underneath, especially on the underside of the body here. And we see a large head. So this is an immature bald eagle. And you can also notice the longer retained juvenile feathers that stick out a bit more and are also a little more faded than the feathers that have already been replaced. Here's another example of an adult red-tailed hawk, and we had 45 red tails counted as migrants today. Here we have a small raptor, and we see pointed wings, so we should be thinking falcon. We see some dark streaking underneath, although it doesn't come out that well in the photo. But if we look at the tail, it's a dark tail with some thin white banding on it. Those field marks make this a merlin. Here we have a hawk overhead. Looking at the overall shape, we should be thinking buteo. We see that the wingtips are somewhat pointed because they're only made up of 4 feathers. 1, 2, 3, 4. We see there's some brown barring underneath. And we see that the tail looks dark with a single wide white band. This is an adult broad-winged hawk. Here's a bird coming straight at us. We see it has a two-toned appearance underneath. We see it's holding its wings up into a V shape called a dihedral, and we see a reddish head. This is a turkey vulture. Here we have a large dark raptor that's getting a mostly white head and tail, but still has some splotchy white underneath. This is an older, immature bald eagle, probably around a 4th-year bird. And here's another immature bald eagle that we were able to pick out multiple times throughout the day as it cruised around because it's missing a chunk of feathers here in the left wing. Here we have a very lanky hawk with a long tail, long, thin wings that are somewhat pointed at the tip, and an owl-like face. This is a northern harrier, and because of how plain it is underneath and very unmarked on the upper breast and patagial areas, this is a juvenile northern harrier. Here we have a small raptor with pointed wings. We should be thinking a small falcon. We see some dark streaking underneath, and we see a dark tail with some white bands. This is another merlin. Here we have a hawk with a long tail and long rounded wings. We should be thinking accipiter, flying cross. We see orange barring underneath, letting us know this is an adult of either sharp-shinned hawk or Cooper's hawk. In this case, we see a large head. We see undertail coverts that are really fluffed out. And the tail is folded, so we can't really get much of a sense of the shape, but we do see a bolder white tip to it, which can be a field mark for adult Cooper's hawk. Here we have another nice comparison shot. The bird on the right, of course, is an adult bald eagle, and the bird on the left is our smallest buteo, the adult broad-winged hawk. And this just goes to show you that broadwings are quite a bit smaller than eagles, and they're lighter in color, so it's no surprise that we sometimes lose them when they're up high against that blue sky. Here we have a large raptor with very pointed wings. We should be thinking large falcon, and look at that head pattern. I don't know how to describe it, but it's pretty distinctive. This is a peregrine falcon. Here we have another bird with pointed wings. This is one of the small falcons, and we see that it's very light in color underneath, and we see a lot of orange in the tail. This is a male American kestrel. Here's a hawk with that classic buteo shape. We see dark patagial bars and a dark belly band, a dark trailing edge to the wings, and a red tail. This is an adult red-tailed hawk, and I'd say this is on the more heavily marked end of the spectrum of what we see. Here's another small raptor with very pointed wings and light color underneath. This is a small light-colored falcon, right? Nope. You got fooled by a swallow. Here we see a forked tail and the red throat of a barn swallow. Here's a bird I don't even want to talk about, but let me set the stage. So to count a flight like today, which is really steady, and especially when the skies are somewhat blue and birds are difficult to spot, it's chaotic because pretty much any direction you look, you're going to be able to pick out birds. There's some going along the lakeshore, some going overhead, some inland. So I'm looking around trying to spot birds. As soon as I look one direction, someone's calling out a bird in a different part of the sky. So it's total chaos, and you get some small raptors going overhead, the accipiters and broadwings and things. They disappear against that blue sky. But sometimes once they get past us, they start to soar up. So you're able to pick through them. The lighting's a little better. Anyway, in the middle of all that chaos, someone had called out a Cooper's hawk, and I look up and I see this bird. And with binoculars, it didn't really strike me as a Cooper's hawk. It was obviously an accipiter, but I took some photos, I could have jumped on the scope, but then it takes a few seconds to even find the bird, and then you don't have photos even if you do find it. So anyway, I snapped some photos, and then by then other birds were going by, and I moved on to them. But another experienced hawk watcher had kind of watched this bird and was having trouble judging how big it was. And if we look at this bird, we see a couple things. We see, first of all, the tail is very fanned out, so it's hard to get a sense of the overall shape of the tail. We see very bulging secondaries to the wings as well, and a small head. So this is obviously not a Cooper's hawk. It's either a sharp-shinned hawk or an American goshawk. Now, you would think it wouldn't be difficult to tell between those two species because there's a huge size difference. But really, they're quite a similar shape. So when you just have one soaring up against the sky, sometimes it's hard to get a sense of the actual size of the bird. So anyway, afterwards, we had some debate. We were trying to look at the photo, but also keep an eye on the migration that was happening. And I said, okay, I'll wait till I get home and get the photos on the computer. So anyway, ultimately, I called this bird a sharp-shinned hawk. If other people want to make the argument that it's an American goshawk, go for it, but it went on the list as a Sharpie. Here we have a large, lanky, black and white raptor with a white head with black line through the eye. This is an osprey. Here we have a hawk that's overall light underneath. The tail is somewhat long, maybe longer than the typical buteo. We see some brown streaking that starts on the upper breast and extends down. But the most notable thing about this bird is when we look at the wingtips, we see a very squared off wingtip with translucent crescents near it. So this is a juvenile red-shouldered hawk. Again, this part of the wing is the most important thing we're looking at. And that will become even more important later on as we start to get the juvenile broad-winged hawks, where the rest of the underside plumage looks almost identical, but the wingtips look different. For the red shoulders, we have 5 feathers making up the wingtip, giving it a blunt tip and those translucent crescents. When we start getting the juvenile broad wings, we're going to see a more pointed wingtip with only 4 feathers making it up and no translucent crescents. And here's a bird that was a real stunner just because of the beautiful light that was on it. This bird shone against that blue sky. We see a buteo with a black and white plumage. We see these black squares in the carpal area. We see a black belly as well. This is a light morph rough-legged hawk, and it's been kind of a low season for rough legs, so it's really nice to get a beautiful look at one of these. This one, I believe, is a juvenile because we don't see a dark trailing edge to the wings, and it has a dark tip to the tail that's quite diffuse. Here's another light-colored hawk. We see a long tail and thin, long, lanky wings with somewhat pointed wingtips. Overall white underneath with a grayish head. We see dark wingtips and a dark trailing edge to the secondaries. This is an adult male northern harrier. Here we have a small buteo with pointed wings, and we see a dark tail with a white band. This is an adult broad-winged hawk. Here we have another northern harrier, but this one has a lot of streaking underneath from the upper breast down and also the patagial areas, so this is an adult female. And you can see it has one wing feather that's kind of broken and hanging back a little bit. Here's a large grayish tan bird with long trailing legs and a long neck and long pointed bill. This is a sandhill crane. And I'll end it with one more look at an adult bald eagle against that beautiful blue sky. We had some special visitors today who I met for the first time. We have Phil and Jen, who are fans of the channel and have been following my videos for a few years, and they traveled all the way from Ottawa, Canada to join us at the Braddock Bay Hawk Watch. Phil and Jen have a YouTube channel called Phil and Jen, where they post videos about RV lifestyle and birding. So I'll include a link to that and check it out if you're interested. Taking a look at the eBird checklist for the Hawk Watch, today we had 66 species. Taking a look at the HawkCount report for our migrant raptor totals, today we had 566 turkey vultures, 3 osprey, 17 bald eagles, 19 northern harriers. For accipiters, we had 102 sharp-shinned hawks and 12 Cooper's hawks. For buteos, we had 4 red shoulders, 240 broadwings, 45 red tails, and 1 rough leg. And for falcons, we had the falcon trifecta with 9 kestrels, 4 merlins, and 2 peregrines, for a grand total of 1,024 migrating raptors. That brings the April total to 14,542 and the season total to 22,662. Taking a look at the forecast for tomorrow, it's looking mainly sunny with a high in the upper 50s and light north-northwesterly winds. So it's a less favorable wind direction, but the winds are fairly light, so we may hold onto a flight line from the platform. My only concern would be it may be tough spotting against those blue skies, but we'll hope that we'll get a continuation of today's good flight. For Wednesday, it's looking cloudy with rain developing later, high in the upper 40s, and easterly winds at 10 to 20 miles per hour. So a less favorable wind and gloomy conditions, would only expect light migration. And for Thursday, it's looking cloudy with showers with a high in the upper 50s and south-southwest winds at 10 to 15 miles per hour. So those are good winds. So if they take some of that rain out of the forecast, it could end up being a decent day. We'll keep an eye on that as we get closer. All right, well, today was another fantastic day of birding and a lot of fun with all the people out visiting the Hawk Watch as we reach the halfway point of the season. So I hope you've enjoyed the first half of the season, and the number of raptors is really picking up and we're starting to get a lot of songbirds migrating. So the second half of the season is going to be a lot of fun. Hope you follow along with us, and I hope you can visit us soon out at the Braddock Bay Hawk Watch. From Lyco Birds, this is David Brown. Thanks for watching.